Hey, Mike, it's Joe.
Hey Joe, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How you doing?
Good.
Good. I just hopped on because I wanted to let you know that if you want to discuss the virtual Arbor Day logistics on April 30th, I believe,
Yeah.
we can set up a meeting for that in the next week or so. So I don't know if that was up for discussion today, but we'll make sure that we get with you prior to that date in the next week or two.
Okay. Yeah, that wouldn't be this meeting, but we definitely want to get together and figure out what we need for that.
Gotcha. Okay. We'll be in touch.
Okay. Thanks, Joe.
Have a great meeting. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, good morning, Mike.
Hey, morning, Tim.
Hey guys, good morning.
Hey, Jeff.
How you doing?
Good. Happy spring,
Yes, indeed.
officially. I'm sure Paul's coming here any moment.
Yeah, you signed into the Excel sheet. I see right now. So
Oh, great.
Hi, gang.
Hello. Gotta pull that up too. So, Paul and Jeff, what would be the best way to kind of structure this conversation? Should we pull up that worksheet?
Yeah. I think, I mean, is everyone here?
Yeah, it looks like some of the folks from NDS are joining us as attendees. So I think we can have them speak as needed. And Jack is here from Public Works.
Great. I see. Yeah, I think the goal of this meeting is really to ask the specific questions. So we're trying to get ready for the code audit and trying to understand what codes are working, which ones are enforceable, which ones are not enforceable. How do we strengthen that, sort of in this upcoming audit, and where to go from here kind of attitude. And so, yeah, I think Tim, going down the list makes sense. So if anyone wants to share a screen and go through that, I can share a screen, or anyone else. Can we do it?
Yeah, can you pull that up, Paul?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Here we go. So we'll just kind of run through these, and we're just trying to, again, sort of understanding, I mean, from tree preservation, replacement. I mean, I think we can, I mean, a few of the key, we sort of listed, well, anyway, there's a lot of questions. Might as well just start at the top. That makes sense? I see Jack. I know there's some 7 or so other people here, so feel free to speak up. I don't see you, but that's fine. So tree protection zones, yes, they're clearly defined in the BMPs as a certain distance away. And how are, I guess, big question first, how is the standards and design manual enforceable, and how are BMPs enforceable, and are they, if they have no, it does say in the specs to refer to the BMPs, but it doesn't say it specifically in the specs. So when it comes to our tree protection zone, which should be of a certain, to calculate those, you'll need to be a certain distance away. I forget what the 1.5 feet. So for every inch of caliper, you have to go out 1.5 feet for that inch of caliper away from that tree for the radius. So that's how you get your gigantic, tree protection zone. But then how, I see that show up on all of the site plans, but I've never seen an accurate tree protection zone shown on a site plan. And so I'm just curious how that's measured, and is it enforceable? What percentage do you actually, they say 20% can be impacted, I guess, in this document, but I don't know if that's ever, anyway. Like how do you deal with tree protection zone, period?
Sure. So this is Jack Dawson. I'm the city engineer, just to be clear, and we're responsible primarily for right-of-way reviews, and then on private property, we enforce the Virginia Storm Management Program, which includes, and the Virginia Erosion Sediment Control Program, and that can complicate things. So in regards to the whole detail that's in the Standards Design Manual, Appendix H, I believe. The Standards and Design Manual is enforceable. It's primarily enforceable through the review, and so for one issue, I'm not sure if it's clear who's looking into all of those things exactly, if those roles have been identified in regards to within the city reviewers. I doubt Mike has the time to review every single plan that comes in. I'm not totally sure about that, but again, what we do as engineers, because we're typically have the most enforcement authority during construction, and the problem that I've identified in regard to enforcing these things, and 10th and High, that project comes to mind. I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with that, or how long you've been on the tree commission or what, but that's a very visible project, and we had trouble. They had a very complicated arborist looked at it and said, here's where the tree protection should go, and I think the plan said unless an arborist says otherwise, which of course they called around to find an arborist who would say otherwise and said otherwise. I'm not a tree expert. I don't have authority to argue with the arborist about what's appropriate. So we went out there after this whole conversation, and the tree protection fence was just laying on the ground, and all the contractors were smoking cigarettes under the tree. So that made me quite angry, and we did give them a notice to comply for that, because the state manual has tree protection details. It's part of a guide. I'm not sure if you've read that or not in the erosion handbook. And I think that one essentially says the fence is at the drip line, which is somewhat enforceable. The problem with our new detail is that it hasn't been approved by the Water Control Board, the State Water Control Board. I don't know all of the administrative machinations that require this, but DEQ operates sort of under the Water Control Board, which is some kind of state agency that approves what DEQ changes. If we want to say, like in the city of Charlottesville, we have a 6,000 square foot threshold for limits of disturbance as triggering stormwater permitting. Most of the state, it's an acre. We got that approved by the Water Control Board. They had to approve that. We cannot do anything more rigorous. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with critical slopes, but that's another thing that I go in front of Planning Commission. Planning Commission says, oh, what if we do this and what if we do that? And as an engineer who enforces VSMP, it's very, that's not really kosher either, because we can't just in Planning Commission say, let's do this above and beyond State Water Control Board. So we do our best to review for the 1.5 times the radius. Once it gets into construction, it's sort of out of our hands a little bit, because I can't enforce this detail and when I say enforced, we typically give corrective action reports, which is you need to fix your silt fence. Then if they don't fix your silt fence, we give them a notice to comply, then we shut them down. There's 0% chance I'm gonna shut a site down based on this, because their lawyers would have a field day in court saying, why are you enforcing this?
So this detail that I see on all the sites, like it's not actually legally enforceable. Is that what you're saying?
From my perspective from a VSP program, correct. Now, again, what we do, my engineers, I know, because this is typically shown on the erosion control plans, look at that and do their best to see that the radius is correct. This gets us to a whole nother conversation, which I'll just touch on, which is the level of engineered plans in the city of Charlottesville. You guys aren't the only people that would like to see contours, that would like to see utilities. And that's why that's such a big ask in a world-class city here with more gazillion dollars, in construction every year. I don't know. I do share that concern. That's totally a legitimate problem. But the real problem becomes if we see it, we will make the comment on the plan. If they don't maintain this in the field, then it's more of a bluff than anything else, because there's, as far as I understand, there's very little we could do. So my recommendation would be think about like how we can make this detail like a 3-page detail with fillable plates, for what is the breast height or diameter at whatever DBH, whatever it is. Have that filled in, have people put that on the plan, and then we can take those 3 plates, 3 details to the State Water Control Board and say, please approve this. And then we can start giving people no replies and threaten them to shut them down, which will get their attention.
But so if you had a detail that you could then give to the state board, you could get them to incorporate that into their, or the city to, sorry, just repeat that one more time.
Yeah, so we would have to, how that actual process works, I don't know, in regards to all the legal administrative work, but we would essentially say, here's our nice, concise detail. As long as I can say, hey, that makes sense to me, I'm not a tree guy, I can go in the field and do that. My engineers can look at it when the plans come in and approve it. Then we would send it to the State Water Control Board. Every year we tell them what we change. We say, we want to change this, can you approve it? I don't know why they wouldn't, as long as it's clear and enforceable. That's the thing. We can't, if the Water Control Board approved this 35-page document, that's unlikely, because it's, and then reading through here, there's lots of should and shall. Whenever you reference like good judgment, can't enforce good judgment. I wish we could, but we can't. And so it needs to be like an actionable detail, if that makes sense. That's very clear. I've only worked in Virginia for like it's 2.5 years now, but in Maryland, they had kind of more rigorous details where I worked there, and I call it a plate, where there's the detail and then there's sort of an accompanying one that looks like a detail that has blanks for you to fill in. How many trees are considered? These 4. What's the breast height? What's the radius? Is the radius shown on the plan? And then the engineers can look at that, say, oh, should be 13.2 feet for tree number 1, 14.7 for this one. Make sure it's okay. And if the Water Control Board approves something that's, again, a little more expeditious and straightforward, then we can enforce it.
Got it. That makes sense to me. Does that make sense? Jeff and Tim, essentially, if there was a clear checklist that says, add these are the trees listed, these are the critical root zones, this is, say, the area of the critical root zone that's required,
Yeah, I think that makes sense, but just to put a punctuation on that, this would be a discussion about how to, I guess, increase the standards for determining critical root zone from the Water Control Board approved standard, which is the drip line, to something that's more of a formula based on the actual size of the tree at DBH. So it's really about establishing a new, standard or formula for determining this. And because it's more rigorous than what's in the manual, it has to be approved by the State Water Control Board. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Their details also is not crystal clear. And if you go to their tree section, it's a whole many pages of should, shall, all these other things, which, people ignore and they ignore them. And so it would be if they had a detail that just showed the tree and fencing at the drip line, which I don't think they actually have that detail. It's just implicit in all the documentation. And we could sort of erase it and say 1.5 times DBH. That'd be the easiest thing to do. So that the Water Control Board, just like our 6,000 foot threshold, is saying, hey, don't worry, we're just changing the 43,000 square foot threshold to 6,000 square feet. It's easy to understand what's going on. And so not being a tree expert and not being intimately familiar with this guidance document, it would be nice. I think the guidance document can be there to inform people who want to do the right thing, but we need to whittle that down to something that's again, based on, did you survey the trees? What are those radius? Write what that resulting rate, tree protection zone is here. Again, if how much is proposed to be disturbed here, because then, so again, the engineers can look, if it looks like they're disturbing half the tree and they say 20%, we'll call them on it, and go from there. But it needs to be something that's digestible, makes sense, and it's easy to enforce.
Mhm.
Great. That's, I mean, that makes more sense why it's not necessarily enforced now. Do existing preserved trees, yeah. So you sort of also touched on this one here, I guess. Do existing trees, appear on grading and utility plans? Like, right now, there's so little specificity on utility plans and on, is there any way to ask developers to include preserved trees, tree protection zone, and fencing on utility plans, on grading plans, and on planting plans? Like, is that a possible ask in the future, or?
Yeah, so we can ask for anything. We're happy to ask for anything you want us to ask for, whether they give it to us or whether we can require it or whether we can say we're not looking at this until you do this is a whole nother question.
Right.
And so
Missy Creasy raised her hand. I think you can just talk, Missy.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so we do find that the plans that don't put trees on the utility or grading plans, it's difficult to be able to determine where those are and if they conflict. And so in a lot of cases, that is one of the asks, if they're not on the same plan, to confirm that they're not trying to put a utility under the tree or within an easement area. So that does get touched during the comment sections.
Yeah, so from an engineering standpoint, again, we're not necessarily looking at the trees outside if they show that tree protection detail. And so there's a whole area where they can sort of pull the wool over if they tell the planners, hey, we're going to save all these trees. And then I might not even read that part when I say, oh, here's one tree that has a tree protection detail on it within or near the LOD. And so, but this would get captured because my team looks at this stuff pretty detailed because we look at the LOD and with being the limits of disturbance from the road sediment control and how are you going to do this? So if they don't show a proposed utility on the existing tree plan, we're going to notice that because we'll say, hey, you're building this water line. It's not in your LOD. Try again, account for that. And eventually, now I'm not going to go back and make sure they show all the existing trees there. There's sort of I think there's a breakdown between what I assume the planners are doing in calculating tree canopy and what we're doing enforcing what we see on the plans, because us as the engineers looking at the road sediment control plan are looking just at that critical root zone. We're not saying how many trees do they have to save. Is this voluntary that they're saving this tree? So and I'm not, maybe Missy can speak to what her team's doing, looking at what those planting calculation numbers are, the canopy numbers and all those things. But when my engineers look at it, we will see the things like the water lines, because that's most of what we look at is make sure they actually understand what it is they're proposing to do and can do it in the phased grading scheme. So we'll pick up things like that and say, hey, show this on the, how I guess I'm sort of reading into your question that it's, if they show you 20 trees that are getting saved, but they don't show that water line there and those are getting whacked, what good is that? And I guess what I'm saying is we'll catch that on the LOD, but even if we catch it, I'm not going to go back and say, well, now you're killing 2 of your 20 trees or whatever it is. There's maybe a disconnect there. Maybe Missy can speak to that.
Well, I mean, they wouldn't have a final, they wouldn't have been able to get to final if they decreased the number of trees that if they were required to keep them from one iteration to the next. So that would be something that potentially, would be looked at. I don't know if anyone has a specific example of that.
I mean, I mean, for instance, I mean, I see this often, like it's Second and Garrett, which I know everyone's like, oh gosh, that project's a nightmare. But just because it's across from my office, I see all the time. But you know, they'll preserve a tree on the plan, but then they'll have a utility, you know, trench 5 feet from the trunk. You know, and I don't know, you know, where you literally cut off 80% of this tree roots in that one major trench. Like, how does that? Who can then say like, oh, you have a utility that you should have tunneled here, you know, but you instead, you know, trenched it. Like who, even I get it that Jack, you're saying you sort of see that and you can say, you know, hey, this is in conflict, but who then rejects that tree and say, you're not actually saving this tree?
So I guess that might be good if it's shown on the plan again. So if we have this detail, it says it's calculate your tree protection zone. It's 23 feet. The area is X. The disturbed area as shown here is less than 20%, so it's okay. My team would be happy to enforce that. If we go in the field and say, hey, you crept this closer, it looks like it's 30%. I'm happy to say this, you're getting a correction active report till you tell me what you're gonna do about this tree. I have no idea what they're supposed to do about the tree. I have no idea if you cut a big tree down, you're supposed to replace it with 3 trees or 4 trees or 2 planting units or 8 shrubs. I have no idea. So that's where there's a little disconnect between what actually gets done in the field and how to tie it back to the approved plan. And again, you know, in 10th and High, I've talked to Missy at some extent, and I think Mike as well, about how to enforce this. And, you know, I got a 12-page report from some arborists about how the tree's gonna be totally fine or whatever it is. And the tree's not gonna be totally fine. And I think Missy said that they don't have the capacity to enforce anything other than to literally wait the 10 years till the tree dies, hope someone is paying attention and to go back and give them a site plan violation, which obviously, again, that means nothing to a developer. Waiting 15 years to get a site plan violation. So how, I don't know enough about the tree counting and canopy counting to tell you how that's best done. We could certainly in the field say, hey, you didn't do what's, if we had a clear and concise detail, my team's happy to say, hey, you're not meeting your detail. And then
Right. If we create that clear detail, which that makes complete sense to have a clear detail with a checklist that you can follow. I'm just curious, you know, then you could sort of send them a report, but would that report then go to NDS, or, you know, it's actually in the field? So yeah, I guess, yeah.
So yeah, so like typically our reports say, you know, your silt fence is supposed to be here, fix your silt fence. Occasionally they say, your site is not working. You need to do this and this in the short term, and you need to give us a new plan. And I'm happy to do that when they screw up erosion controls all the time. We do it all the time. But I don't know what to do other than say, you haven't met your detail. You've disturbed 34% instead of 20%. That's all I know how to do. You know, what even happens after that, I don't know.
Well, this is really helpful because what we've been talking about within like the tree commission meetings is just number one, understanding how things work now based on what the code says in the ordinance. And then the whole separate dimension of that is, well, how could it be different? What could be amended, modified, improved as part of this upcoming code audit that the city's doing? So just learning how things are happening now is so helpful so that we can, you know, start to prepare recommendations or requests for the code audit. And we've kind of thought about it in these terms too, like there's the minimum standards are one thing, but it's like, what do the developers, the applicants need to actually show in their site plan submittals? So that's like another question or area that could potentially be improved. And then there's the whole issue of inspections, you know, like maybe before and during construction and after construction, and then like enforcement. So if there does need to be replacements, you know, how does that get carried out successfully? But I think we're also just really curious to hear, Jack, your perspective and other, you know, the plan reviewers' perspectives on how could we improve each step of that process? Like, you know, would it be helpful if the code was amended to require an additional sheet in the site plan submittal that did show grading and utilities and tree preservation or tree protection practices, you know, on one exhibit so that different reviewers of different, you know, training and experience and positions can look at it in one exhibit and see, there's like obviously a conflict here. And what's shown for protection is not gonna be preserved if they do this grading or this utility or whatever. Like if we just literally make them connect the dots when they submit site plans, I don't think it'd be a huge burden for the consultants to make one more sheet by turning on those particular layers so that all the reviewers can quickly understand like the real world outcomes of what's being proposed. Does that sort of additional requirement seem like it would kind of solve a lot of these gaps right now, or is that not really where the main issue is?
No, I'm gonna try not to be too cynical here, but no, you're describing the way that it should and does work in places that have a functional program here. In Virginia, it is very hard for whatever reason. I think it's some our local historical culture of development, as well as the state's right or the property rights thing in Virginia, which is very big. But it would, geez, that would be tough to make that a requirement. The amount of comment letters I write that say identify your site outfall on your plan. I'm talking about stormwater here, which you think people would start with, and then they say, okay, now it's labeled. Oh, well, now you got to actually determine where. This goes on and on forever. Like it would, yes, you should be able to have an existing resources plan that shows all trees over X height or whatever it is, and then a forest conservation plan that shows all the proposed trees, all of the existing trees to remain, and tabulate those. And then you don't need to show utilities, you just show the LOD on that plan. And so now everybody knows what they're looking for. I don't have to count the trees because the planners are looking at the LOD and doing that themselves. So if I go out there in the field and say, you haven't saved this tree because you moved your LOD out, you worked outside your LOD or whatever it is, I can say, you're getting a notice to comply that you have to sort this out with the planners or whatever it is. And then the planners can go back and look at whatever that is. And again, the key there is to make it a significant fine for cutting down a tree that you otherwise say you protect. Again, I'll use the critical slopes as a great example. The Planning Commission approves critical slopes disturbance with conditions. There is no enforcement of those conditions. There's nothing. If you don't do it, there's nothing I can do about it. And so again, there has to be some teeth behind there. And maybe Missy can speak to this again, but it's hard for us to require people to put more information on the plan. But I think, yeah, again, that happens all over the place. Here's my existing forest. Here's my proposed conditions forest. Here's what's getting saved. Here's what I'm adding. Here's what it is. And then if somebody amends their plan, which they do all the time because the foresight is so shoddy here that they just throw something on a plan, they amend it 14 times. We would say on sheet 3, you've amended your LOD. Show that on sheet 3, update your tree sheet. There's ways to do that, but I don't know. My cynicism says that's more aspirational than achievable in our local climate. But again, maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, we find that that situations where we have a discretionary review, where it goes to Planning Commission and City Council, there is a desire for maintaining trees. And some applicants also have that desire as well. And then they move forward with a plan that, long-term, it's not likely to save the situation. And, we definitely have that concern in a number of spots. 10th and High is probably the biggest one. Every time I drive by that site, that tree, I worry about it. And, we have pretty limited ability otherwise for maintenance of trees on site. In most cases, the developer, if they're doing a by right, they're going to take everything off the site. It's just going to, because most sites are being filled to capacity, and trying to save the trees are pretty difficult. That's not that we shouldn't try in situations where it definitely makes sense to do. It's not an easy not an easy thing. You know, on the planning side, yes, we're looking at to make sure that they have noted that they meet the tree requirements. The site plans are forwarded to Mike to see if he has any concerns as well. And you know, as it progresses through the comments section, if there are changes in that, then that gets reviewed.
Yeah, well, that's helpful. And it sounds like, you know, the submittal requirements is maybe not the most fruitful place to focus. It sounds like really like inspections is a big deal. I'm curious if there's an opportunity to do inspections really for, like, I guess it'd be ENS control and tree protection measures before like mass grading begins. I don't know I don't perfectly understand the sequence of that, but I'm wondering if either the code is currently written in a way or if it could be amended in a way to where, you know, the inspections for these tree protection practices happen before other demo and mass grading begins, to make sure
And that is what happens. I mean, if, you know, the site needs to comply with the plan, and the inspectors that are out there are looking in the beginning to make sure that those measures are in place before, you know, they go and do all the big stuff. It's just that someone's not standing there the whole time.
Sure.
And you could go by a site multiple times a day and things are in different, you know, a different status. I know we had multiple people going by the 10th and High, and fences were up, fences were down, you know, they were in this location, that location. There was a lot of effort that went into trying to get it to the point it is now, which is still, you know, potential concerns.
So to that point, Missy, you know, is there a way to then say like this tree is severely damaged, or if a tree is removed, like are there any repercussions? Like the BMP has this one section that says if there's a tree that was supposed to be preserved that's not preserved, if it's severely damaged or destroyed, you know, like then there's like this long list of requirements, like the tree has to be a 3-inch caliper tree, you know, it has to, you probably know the one I'm talking about, but like this section here where it says like a tree replacement schedule, like if you've severely damaged a tree, destroyed a tree, these are the 3-inch caliper replacement trees. So I guess two questions: is this ever enforced? And you know, for a tree that's supposed to be preserved that's not, you know, can you actually enforce this? And then if they can't fit a 3-inch caliper tree on the site, can they, you know, or 10 of them or more, could you then put that into a fund?
Well, if the tree ends up being removed, then we can't close out their site until they remedy the situation. And so if that means, you know, and you know, how that is taken care of is going to vary. Typically it would be having some of our staff and Mike, of course, look at the situation and see what would make sense based on the circumstances of the site. And, you know, if they've got to replace with multiple trees, it's not the same. I mean, you all well know that.
Right, but getting, I mean, 10 3-inch caliber trees, that's, you know, you're looking at a, you know, almost $10,000, you know, cost to the developer. I mean, if you're
No, and I mean, they chose to, well, in most cases, they're going to make the decision whether they're going to keep the tree or not. You know, in a lot of circumstances, if it's a, you know, significant size tree, it's going to be more valuable to their property to maintain it. I mean, that's just, there's a lot of logic to that.
But at the William Taylor Plaza, you know, which is also another terrible project as a reference, but that one, you know, major site wall, there's supposed to be an arboretum, you know, they literally put the foundation almost, you know, through the entire root zone of a major tree that died. You know, like lots of trees didn't make it on that project that were taken down. Like, what's the remedy for that? You know, even if they're still standing and dead. what's the, like, is there anyone that goes back and says, this tree died in this process?
Well, we wouldn't necessarily close out their bonding if we're in a situation where we have trees that have died. They would have to remedy that before their bonds would be released. And that's really the only stick we have.
And by remedying that in the bond, do you reference that 3-inch, that chart for BMPs and how to remedy that? Or do you just have like a 1-to-1 replacement? And I see Matt, your hand's raised as well. Feel free to chime in if you have another comment.
I'm not sure about that specific situation. I don't know that, in fact, I don't believe William Taylor Plaza's tree situation has been resolved at this point. I believe we're awaiting legal guidance.
Yeah, so I'm not so sure that this does get effectively enforced because, again, my folks don't necessarily, especially with the level of the details we're at now, as I've described, we're not equipped to determine if the trees lived, and I don't know that NDS does. We don't have bonds on trees, I don't believe, unless it's a special thing, unless I'm mistaken. And I don't think the planners do field walks to confirm these things. And so that goes back to like what it should be. The way to make this work is say, if you disturb more than your critical root zone is 1.5, if you disturb more than 30% of that, we consider that tree dead. You have to bond every tree at $1,000, and we're not getting your bonds back to replace them as X. And it's a very simple metric because as one of you gentlemen was talking about earlier, we are trying to do our best to increase erosion sediment control, review, execution, enforcement, all of these things. And part of that is preliminary or initial sediment controls is what it's called, which is essentially perimeter fencing, self-fencing, and tree protection. So that's something that it's in the hopper that they cannot proceed to their next phase until they get an email from a special account that says, we've inspected, everything that's shown on sheet 12 is done in accordance, or you need to bump out your tree protection fencing, before you disturb it. And then if we can determine, because as engineers, we'll go out there, we've argued with people all the time. If they say, oh, we didn't disturb 6,000 square feet, we probably shouldn't be doing this as a surveyor, but we'll go GPS it and say, we've got 8,000 square feet, you need to do this permit. We don't have, if it comes down to it, we don't have a problem establishing, hey, you're so foot away from your the trunk, you've clearly disturbed more than 30%, we could do that at the initial controls. I think it needs to be clear what's on the plans and what happens if you don't do what's on the plans, and then we can enforce it from there. But one thing I did want to note, the severely damaged, anytime that there's this like implicit professional judgment built in there, because severely
someone's gonna say, what's severely damaged? Like,
that should be, no, if you disturb more than 30% as established by this or this process, that tree's considered dead. You need to replace it with 4 trees. And then I don't know if this is legal in Virginia at all. I've never heard of it being done, but I haven't practiced that much. Bond the trees. And then they have to apply to get their money back, and then somebody can go inspect them. Now, again, if I would want to be Mike, going to a site that's otherwise closed out and staring at these 5 trees and decide if he was going to take $8,000 a tree from, these people are not based on his judgment. So it should be a more rigorous, no, we showed that you trenched through this tree and therefore disturbed this, then leave it all on Mike. But there needs to be bonds and repercussions here.
Yeah, I think you can bond landscaping, I'm pretty sure. I don't know the details of how that's typically done or what the best practices are, but that seems like it might be a practice worth exploring further. And I mean, with Mike being certified, I think the city would have a strong leg to stand on if we, did inspections and looked at things, and, maybe there's different ways to define severely damaged or destroyed.
Right.
30% would be like a professionally accepted standard. There could be other circumstances that pertain. If you whack off 75% of the canopy, I'm just making things up now, but I feel like if it was based on inspections and evidence and a report, I feel like Mike's position should carry enough weight to not prevent us from doing those things when it's necessary. But I know that the details make all the difference from one site to the next.
So summarizing this process, as long as we have a clear process of determining what your critical root zone is, as well as what is defined as what's damaged, what's not damaged, what percentage can be impacted, et cetera, that a developer has to input in there. Potentially, that could go, that could be reviewed by the water control, state water control review board, and then get approved for Charlottesville. That's what we could sort of ask in this plan review process. And we could also ask in this code review process, is there a way to tie bond to tree protection? I mean, that would be ideal if that's possible. Does that sort of summarize what we just sort of been talking about? Because this next section gets more into actually the site plan and more NDS side of things. That last part was sort of more, Jack, your side, I think, and sort of enforcement and what you're looking at on site. And so now, any other questions? I mean, we have more preservation things, but I think this kind of sequentially moves into NDS items. So, for example, there's this requirement that trees are sort of large canopy trees in the, per planting, unless specified, and they have a different spacing if they're supposed to be medium canopy trees. But anyway, who's checking to make sure the trees meet, the master tree list? Like, does anyone do that?
Yeah, Paul, I review probably more of the species composition of the things that come in, and I will make comments on things that are unsuitable or invasive or things like that. And particularly, special care to things that are in the public right of way versus I probably have more say than something on private property. So I'm looking at that.
There's lots of references in the specs that the trees should meet the city's master tree list. We have certain requirements, like you can't have a certain percentage, of say crepe myrtles. Like you can't have a project that has 100% crepe myrtles. Like you just, there's not you have to have more diversity per master tree list, and certain species we're trying to avoid from a pest standpoint, like ash trees, that you're not supposed to use ash trees, but we're sometimes still seeing them show up on drawings. And so just making sure that, like, if you approve like a tree that's not a large canopy tree, do you notify NDS that's not a large canopy tree, and that should then like have a 25-foot spacing versus a 50-foot spacing? Like, how does that work?
Sure. Yeah, I will put that in my comments and say that, they need a large canopy tree here for the requirements. But again, the species composition, if they came in and they wanted all red maple, since that part is not code really enforceable, we can ask them to do that. And generally people, are more likely, they're pretty cooperative and they listen to sort of these species comments. But again, it's harder to enforce. If I can't just say, you need more diversity, and then they kind of come back and like, well, what exactly are you looking for?
But there are places in the specs that say you should meet the city master tree list unless approved otherwise. Like, wouldn't that make it a binding document that you have to follow?
I mean,
or you're saying it's sort of suggestive, and the master tree list is not. It's not required. It's just like a suggestion.
I mean, to say that you have to meet the master tree list is sort of open-ended. Like they can say, well, I have all red maple and it's on the master tree list, right?
But the master tree list does say you can only put 15% red maples on your site plan.
Right. But again, that's also not a code. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, that's my question, is like, is the master tree list, if it's referenced in the specification or in the code, that you should follow the master tree list unless given permission otherwise.
Mhm.
Like, wouldn't that make it a requirement and not a suggestion?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of open to interpretation. Like I said, generally it's not an issue and people are willing to accommodate sort of species, you know, suggestions.
So is that just a subjective? So when you're looking at this, it's sort of a subjective list. You don't think of it as code. But that's something that we could strengthen to make sure it's clear that is codified if we were doing the site, in this code process. Would that be helpful?
Yes.
Okay. And the other one, there's a requirement in the site planning of planting islands with a minimum of 50 square feet per tree and a minimum dimension of 5 feet. How is this confirmed on site plans? This is if you have 10 feet or more of building setback. Is anyone checking for that, or how does that, like, whose responsibility is it to confirm what the width of planters are? I think this falls to NDS.
Yeah, I'm not 100% on if we're exactly what we're doing for the planting islands. I mean, logic would note that we would provide some measurement, but there's probably other circumstances. I don't know if someone else has a thought to add to that. Yeah, okay, so I'm getting confirmation from folks that they do review that. Now, what happens in the field might vary.
Yeah.
And then we're in a situation where we go out and if it's not correct, it gets tricky, especially if it's on the private property versus public property.
So I'm jumping ahead to parking lot design as well, because parking lots are very explicit about, like, all internal planters have to have a 9-foot width. And it's another site where, even like, this is from the dairy market building. They have a sycamore, or London plane tree in a 3-foot planter, but it's like clearly required that it's 9 foot. Like, it's so explicitly 9-foot planter width in all of the code, but yet, like, what happens out there is something totally different. Like, how does that get enforced, or is that, like, who reviews that?
So it's reviewed as part of on the drawings to assure that it meets those requirements of the code.
No, much. Can y'all hear me? I'm not sure.
Sort of.
Yep.
Is this better?
Yes.
So I can tell you, Paul, one problem we have with the code, the planners do look at the parking, but one problem there is with the code is the landscape parking is only required for parking that is not ancillary. So the way it's written is actually only required for parking without an ancillary use. It's a horrible code section.
So could you convey, so I understand it as, like, things that are over 20 spaces is how I read the code from a landscape standpoint. But what do you mean when you say ancillary?
So you have to go to the definition section.
Uh-huh.
And it says, let me pull this up, give me a second. So I'm having trouble with my computer, and that's why I might keep going in and out. So when you look in the definition section of parking, it tells you what a parking lot is. And then when you look at the landscape section for a code, it says for this section, a parking lot. So it gives you the definition of parking lot for over
19 spaces.
19 spaces.
Right.
But that means you have to go back to the definitions to see what a parking lot is And a parking lot is only something that's a standalone. So it's not a parking lot if it's ancillary to a use. So if you build a store and you build parking for that store, per the code, it's not a parking lot.
So this is a parking lot that's just an isolated parking lot all by
Yes.
itself.
Yes, we try to enforce it for when someone does an ancillary parking lot, but it actually is not per the code.
Wow. So that's
Yeah.
significant. So
Yeah, it's a
every
horrible
parking lot
code section.
doesn't need to meet any of these requirements.
That according to the code, it would not. Now, again, we try to enforce it. But push comes to shove, that's not what the code says. And that's typical of our code. I mean, that's the horrible stuff we're dealing with.
So if we describe, well, how would you define something that's a parking lot that's not ancillary? Would you say non-ancillary? Or,
Well, I mean, I think we need the parking, the landscape requirement just tied to general parking. It shouldn't be broken out into the parking. Yeah, I mean, Paul, did you have your code section up? That code?
I can, yeah.
If you go to 34/1200, the definitions, you'll see kind of what I'm talking about.
1200, 34, 12.
All the way at the end of the code.
Oh, at the very end of,
Yep, definitions, Article 10.
I see. So what am I looking for here? Parking? A lot of definitions here, sorry.
Yeah, I'm looking too.
Parking lot means a parking area for automobiles which is not accessory use to a building or structure on the same lot. So this is the problematic definition.
And this is just a good example of these type of things that don't get looked at because, the code is put together in small sections. And so, yes, I was just pointing that out to show we have problems with the code. We try as planners to, we still try to enforce the landscaping section. But when we talk about how the code is written, we run into these kind of issues all the time. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So how, in this upcoming, code revision process, I mean, one thing I'm worried about is that is this going to be a complete rewrite or is this going to be an edit of our current, not code, but our code? Yeah. Do we have a clear?
Our understanding is it's going to be a new code.
A total rewrite. So all of these comments, we're sort of saying, these are the things we actually like and we'd like to keep in here, but the rest of it, hopefully you just rewrite. Is that accurate, I guess?
That's the general feedback that we've been given. Now, what that's going to look like, we haven't quite gotten to that part of the phase, though it's coming up pretty quick. We're working through land use map next couple of weeks here. We've got the chapters coming out very soon for public review. And then we'll be moving to the zoning ordinance. So.
And are there other state, or sort of other cities or counties that you're talking to say does your code work? Should we use your code or should we, or is, I guess this is the consultant's job to just say, this is the best code for Virginia. I'm just curious of is there any precedent? I'm thinking about it from a tree standpoint, obviously, but I'm curious if it transforms to other ones. But if there are areas of Virginia that have really great tree code that, those municipalities do we know what those are? Is that part of this design process of the code rewrite? Do we know?
I don't know that they have gotten into the more specifics of tree elements.
Sure.
In
No,
Virginia.
I'm sure they haven't. I guess I'm just, generally what the process is going to look like. But I guess I'll follow along for when that shows up.
Yeah, it seems like that next step is coming in the near future, and this is a chance for me to apologize and say that the last tree commission meeting, I had it backwards. I thought it was pushed back till April 2022. And Matt correctly pointed out that it's actually this April where that code audit will start in earnest. So thanks for that correction, Matt. And I wish I had seen that during the meeting, but I guess the takeaway is that, maybe the tree commission can help be a voice to say, okay, if roadside Hartwell is thinking more about repeal and replace, then let's look at this locality or that locality as a great model, like whether it's Norfolk or Richmond or maybe somewhere not even in Virginia, I don't know. But we could help maybe try to generate some of those ideas. Or if it's more surgical amendment process, we can say, hey, one way to get a better outcome for our urban tree canopy is to look at the definition of parking lot. Because to exempt landscaping requirements in all parking situations except for standalone parking lots, which is not a very common land use, and to not have that be fully enforceable at all of the parking that happens as a requirement with other land uses. I mean, that's just a huge missed opportunity, as you all have pointed out. So that's really good feedback in terms of what we can do to report through that steering committee structure, some specific recommendations on how either the process or the code that dictates the process can be refined for better outcomes.
I see, Brian, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I know some of us have got to leave in about 5 minutes, but the other thing, just to piggyback on that, because I think Matt he's mentioned this several times, is, our code is written very much, it's like somebody grabbed a greenfield development code, and
Right.
almost 90% of the stuff we're dealing with is redevelopment. And, there's no guidance in there about, what happens when you chip up a parking lot and redo it. What standard are you supposed to get? There's no non-conforming site definition at all. And so we kind of have to make it up as we go. And anytime our attorneys get involved, they sort of say, what code sections are you basing this on? And there's nothing in there to talk about. So that's one thing where it'd be really interesting to see what are the best practices out there for communities that, just aren't seeing greenfield development, because all of our regulations seem to be prefaced on, unlimited design flexibility that we just don't have.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I don't want to be quick here with a bunch of these additional questions here, but the on-site checklist for ENS, could that be used to sort of add tree protection items to that checklist?
It could, for the ones that fall under the critical, that replace the existing tree protection ones. Yes, that needs a whole rewrite itself. But
so that could be edited with this whole
yes.
New detail. And
Correct.
then finally, this is a big one too, is the site plan review process. There used to be like a clear projects currently in review spreadsheet. And are you still tracking that? There used to be what's hot, projects that are hot. And you could see sort of when the submission date, you could see when things were coming in, when responses were due. I mean, I don't know. Does this ring a bell? I can't find that on the site anymore. I guess when I got rebuilt.
Yeah, well, there's a long saga behind those reports, but that spreadsheet does still exist in the planner's realm. We do have it, and we kind of update it on request. As a workflow tracking tool, we migrated to a different spreadsheet that's internal to that's accessible to all the reviewers to kind of say, okay, which plans are coming in. And part of the frustration with that, I think the reason we did it the way that we did is because there were a lot of projects that we were not listing on that were smaller, that kind of fill in the gaps of these other reviews. And it was hard for our reviewers to prioritize, okay, what's absolutely pressing, even if it's a tiny little easement review or a lot line adjustment. I got to get that done by this date, and then this major plan is 3 days away or whatever. We do still have that. The longer term solution is our permitting system. We have an RFP out to. We're actually evaluating the responses to an RFP to redo the permitting system, and one of the elements of that is public facing data and an interface where anyone can kind of go and poke around in the system and see what's
happening.
What's reviewed, what's in review, what's been submitted. Literally, ideally it'll be, a submission will come in and people will, if you want to be pinged, you'll be pinged about, hey, new site plan. And all of it'll be, kind of off.
So the answer is yes. There potentially could be electronic notification in the future of pending site plans, but not currently. But that's part of
Yeah,
this.
there is a tool online that connects to that spreadsheet. But I found it kind of clunky. It's not as helpful, and
Like that simple PDF was really nice before, just so you knew what was happening. And then, if Mike had a question, something we knew he was reviewing. And again, the Tree Commission doesn't want to review site plans. We have no purview to review site plans. We totally understand that. But we just want to know what site plans are happening.
Is the external development review dashboard on the NDS page, is that being updated?
Yeah, that feeds from the spreadsheet that we fill out.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. But it seems clunky to me. And we've got a lot of efforts in our new permitting system that we're working towards. And so we're trying to keep momentum there.
So is there a timeline for that process?
We are, like I said, we're in reviews of that. We've actually, Jack and I were in demonstration. We saw some demos the past couple of weeks. So the group that's reviewing those is moving towards selecting, a winner by the end of the month, and then we have to go into contract negotiation with that winner, and then they start working on implementation. Depending on who the company is, each one has a different kind of implementation timeline. But it's not, it's not a Belmont Bridge, we'll be talking about it for 10 years before you see it type thing.
It's a 6 months, 6 to 8 months.
This is moving. Maybe. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine a lot of it depends on the technical back end stuff of migrating data and making sure everything talks to one another. And but we did a lot of work in advance of this in terms of process flows that hopefully makes this a lot smoother than if anyone remembers the one that we did 10 years ago. Hopefully this one's a lot smoother than that one.
I know we got to sign off here, but finally, these are kind of some harder ones, but the advisory environmental project checklist, is that required? This one, does anyone familiar with this? I don't know. That's like it's referred to in a number of places. I'm just not sure if anyone ever uses it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever seen that before,
Mm-hmm.
Jack. But
yeah,
we have a lot of checklists floating around.
Well, I know this is a checklist. It's not clear how, it's very vague, and there's not a yes or no. It's and if there is a no, it doesn't matter. I didn't understand how this actually worked, so that makes sense. And then there's in that site plan checklist, there's also this conservation checklist that's signed. I'm not sure what that is, but anyone know about a conservation checklist?
Is that part of the ENS process, tree protection? I think a conservation checklist
Yeah.
is usually tied into the ENS program or VSMP. But I don't know. I don't know for sure.
I don't believe so. I'm not familiar with that unless it's something I'm thinking of a different name or something like that, but I haven't seen anything like that.
Okay.
All right, then this is just the stream buffer violation mitigation plan and fee. This is a small one, but like this makes no sense currently, and I've actually worked through this process with some of you all, and like it's a total mess right now. That's something to be reviewed, not really common for you all, but then one other one is this primary and linking street wall screening requirements. There's sort of two requirements. One is, a large tree, one every 1,000 square feet, and then one is a large tree every 50 feet. It seems like they're competing with each other, but anyway, I'm not sure if anyone's ever checking on those. And if it's not a large tree, instead of one every 50 feet, it's supposed to be one every 25 feet. So how's that implemented?
So on the initial site plan, whichever criteria is applicable to the site, that notation will be made.
It's pretty clear. You always use the primary and linking street wall discussion or that as a type.
If that's the criteria for that zoning classification, which it can be different. The primary and linking are more for the mixed use corridors than the residential and straight commercial.
Right. So it is utilized. Then there's just, again, this is sort of a discrepancy, I guess, for maybe the code folks someday to look into, if it's part of the code review process about, is there sort of overlap in what your requirements are. And then digital site plans, is that something that you all, I saw that you're recently accepting paper copies again, but can you recall?
Well, we continue to get paper copies. We do get electronic versions of plans, and we don't have a system internally right now to address those very easily. So we get both. And the paper is the one that's looked at most specifically. And we do get a digital PDF for each of the versions. And then at the end, we get we get it into a digital format. So we've got it that way, but we don't have a very well-defined process for that. Our department is still incredibly paper-based. And we're hopeful that some of this new system that we're bringing in will assist in moving to some more electronic opportunities.
Got it. And I guess the tree commission in the past used to look at site plans, and then we sent comments on it as advisory comments. But then that stopped. We did about like 25 different site plans, but then it was a clear stop, And so projects like Friendship Court showed up that don't seem to meet some requirements, but they're not. I mean, after this conversation today, I understand that some are vague and difficult to enforce and such. But is there any possibility of tree commission looking at site plans in the future from an advisory standpoint, or is that possible?
I mean, we forward them on for Mike's review, and there's potential for that to occur there. Our timeframes are pretty compact, and so how the group would be able to work through that could be tricky. We do have, site plan conferences for the new plans, and, those are open to the public. But yeah, that's probably the best way to to get some feedback in.
It's for the general public site plan reviews.
Well, there's site plan conferences where we
Conferences.
introduce the plan to the public.
And is there there's a period for public comment in that?
Mm-hmm.
And to get notifications, I mean, what was nice before is Mike would just send us a list. He'd say, here are the 5 projects that I'm reviewing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could just say, well, this is the only one that's actually of a certain size. That's the only one we actually care about. The rest of them are just, some tiny little projects. Like, is there, the way there used to be that nice spreadsheet that said, here are all the projects coming up. I guess what you're working through now, that could, in 6 months or so, whenever that sort of revised, here are the current site plans in review spreadsheet might be, that could then be sent to the tree commission, or we could just look at it online. Is that the goal of that?
Yeah, I mean, we've got that, even though it's clunky, the listing of site items under review, it could be something that the group decides to at least look at the topic areas. And if there's something of interest to request more information on, because it does note when things came in and where they are in the comment process.
Right. All right, well, I think this cover, I know we're going 10 minutes over right now, so I appreciate everyone staying on. Jeff or Tim, are there other things that come to mind, or even Jody, if you have questions that's here on here as well?
No, and I've got a transition as well, but I think more questions will come up as we continue to dive into this. But even this initial conversation has been extremely helpful to understand like where some of the glitches are in terms of like the way parking is defined as one example, and just knowing where some of the difficulties lie in terms of the way the code is written and how you all administer it, day after day and week after week. So I think it's a great, really helpful initial conversation. Really appreciate it.
Seconded. Thanks for everyone for joining today.
And thank you, Paul, and to the NDS staff, Missy and the others. I wish I could be more helpful as a planning commissioner, but as you all know, I only see the things that are coming to the planning commission for SUPs or special considerations. So for many of these, I don't even know that the site plans are being evaluated. So that's where it's going to be very important to work with NDS staff and with Mike. I think we really need Mike's help to inform tree commission of what's being reviewed.
Yeah, it would be great if on our SUPs, if you could clearly note that, landscape requirements were for general parking, if you were setting them, that'd be great. All right. I think that's it on our end. Mike, anything else from you? Okay, you're muted. I heard you say no. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you too. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.